Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we will continue. That's Modo. Hello, Modo.
Hello, Shah.
Yeah. Okay. So, what time's in Gambia right now?
Early morning. It's not even yet. It's just 8:40, 6:40 in the morning.
Okay. Earlier than Germany, yeah.
Germany is 8:40, yeah.
Okay, you are 2 hours ahead of the Gambia.
Yeah.
And then
Okay,
Indonesia
thank
is.
you. Yeah, good morning for Modo and Andres, and good afternoon from Indonesia. Yeah, so today is our second meeting with Dr. Andreas Ufen on our topics on electoral governance, and today's Dr. Ufen will share to us, the specific topic on first past the post system in Malaysia, implementation, challenges, and critics. Yeah, and as usual, he will deliver the topic between 30 and 45 minutes. And after that, I wish you can ask him, about the Malaysian elections, why Malaysia applies this system, why different with Indonesia, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so time is yours, Andrea.
Okay, thanks very much. I try to start the presentation.
Yeah,
you can see it.
That's good.
Okay. So, okay, it's about the first past the post system in Malaysia, a plurality system. I'm working a lot on Malaysia and on Malaysian elections and political parties. And I think Malaysia is also very interesting because of the political developments since 2018, because the opposition won for the first time in 2018 in the national elections. Before, from 1957 to 2018, there was always the same government led by the United Malays National Organization. And then they lost, and people would ask, why did they lose these elections? What happened? So I will start with a little bit on the political and the party system in Malaysia, because you need this background information to understand elections and the electoral system, or the effects of the electoral system. I will then focus on the 2018 national and state elections. There are elections at the national level and in the different states, a bit like in Germany with the Länder, what I last week presented. The next elections in Malaysia will probably be in 2022. It's not yet clear, but that's what people think after Corona, maybe mid-2020, and these elections will also be very, very interesting. But the last elections have been in 2018. Then at the end, I will talk about general advantages and disadvantages of first past the post systems, FPTP, and then focus a bit on the effects of FPTP in Malaysia, because in Malaysia, many things are a bit different. So last time I already talked a little bit about different electoral systems and electoral system families. I will talk about that in more detail next week. And I told you that there are three, according to the table on the left side, there are three different families. plurality or majority systems, then on the right side, proportional representation, and in the middle, there are so-called mixed systems or semi-PR systems. I would actually call them mixed systems in the middle, and parallel systems, for example, I will talk on that next week, like in the Philippines, for example, and many other countries. And Germany was a case that was, according to the left table, mixed member proportional was a type of proportional representation system. I think this is true, but according to the table on the right side, MMP is a mixed system because there were two different elements, plurality and proportional representation. But I think the logic of the German system was still proportional representation. So this week we go to the plurality or majority systems. And you will see on the left side FPTP, first past the post. That's a classic electoral system. And this type of system you will find in the United Kingdom, Canada, India, New Zealand, in the US, of course, then in some Caribbean nations, in 10 Asian states, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Malaysia, and also in 18 African nations, maybe also in Gambia, I don't know. And in total, 68 out of 212 countries have these first past the post systems, plurality systems. I mean, there are differences. In Malaysia, you only have one election, and the candidate who gets the most votes will automatically enter parliament. Sometimes you have 2 rounds, yeah, and then it is a majority system because you need then more than 50%. But in Malaysia, you can be elected if you are lucky, and there are many different candidates with only 10 or 15 or 20% of the votes, yeah, and then you have a plurality more than all others, but not a majority. So in FPTP systems, the winning candidate is simply the person who wins most votes in a single member district, or SMD. Single member district means you have 222 districts or constituencies in Malaysia, and in every constituency, one person is elected directly, yeah? Single member districts. In Indonesia, you have MMDs or multi-member districts, 3 to 10, if I'm right. 3 to 10 candidates are chosen in the 80 districts or constituencies. That's totally different. A totally different dynamic is linked to this type of electoral system. And next week, I will talk also a bit on the different subfamilies with alternative vote and block vote and so on. This has a lot to do with the question whether there are single member districts or multi-member districts, but you will see that next week. So on the political system in Malaysia, let me have a look here. Okay, it's a monarchy, but it's a constitutional monarchy. The king is elected by hereditary state rulers for 5 years. There are many kings in Malaysia. It's a bit strange. In the states, there are, I think, 9 different kings, and they elect or select a king for the whole of Malaysia for 5 years. But the king is, I wouldn't say unimportant, but it's more a figurehead. But sometimes he has quite an influence, especially if there are no clear majorities in parliament. Then the king has to pick the one who will be prime minister, at least for a specific time. This is what happened during the last few years, yeah, after Mahathir stepped down in 2020. Then the king had to find a new PM, and he gathered all MPs to the palace and talked to every one of them to 222 people and asked them who would be the right prime minister. And at the end, he came up with a decision, quite controversial. So sometimes the king is really influential, also at the state level, but usually more a figurehead. Malaysia has a bicameral parliament. That means two chambers, a Senate and a House of Representatives. And we are talking here now about the House of Representatives. They are the Dewan Rakyat. The Senate is not really important. I think it should become more important in the coming years, but so far it's a so-called rubber stamp. Forget about the Senate. Yeah, I hope it will be much more active in the future. And many members of the Senate are appointed by the monarch and some are elected by the state legislatures. So you have 222 members. Here it is stated they serve 5-year terms. 5 years are the maximum. It is 3 to 5 years. After 3 years, the prime minister could decide to hold elections. Yeah, this is the prerogative of the prime minister. It's a big advantage and it's also very controversial, and they want to change that. In the UK, they have a law that prescribes the length of the term. In Malaysia, not really. It's 3 to 5 years, and nowadays they have surveys, and when the prime minister thinks, oh, it's the right time because people support me, we will have elections. It is, I would say, or it was from 1957 to 2018, an electoral authoritarian system. Yeah, electoral authoritarian means it is authoritarian, not a real democracy, but the elections are at least, or have been at least, semi-competitive. Yeah, the elections were not so bad, but UMNO always won. And civil liberties and political rights were restrained. So in the Freedom House ranking, it was 4 and 4. You know, it's from 1 to 7. 1 is very democratic, 7 is almost totalitarian. And Malaysia was straight in the middle. And that's typical for electoral authoritarian systems. Yeah, you could also call it competitive authoritarian. That's the term used by, I think, Levitsky, for example. Yeah. And the whole system was characterized by the hegemony of Barisan Nasional. In Malaysia, they say Barisan Nasional. They always mix Malay and English in a strange form. So Barisan Nasional was a coalition of 13 parties, but led by the United Malays National Organization. UMNO was a bit like Golkar under Suharto, you could say, but not that authoritarian. Yeah, Malaysia has been much more competitive than New Order Indonesia. But since 2018, after the opposition won the elections, the political dynamics are totally different. Now maybe it's an electoral democracy, or it's in between. In 2018, I was of the opinion now it's an electoral democracy. What is an electoral democracy? It's not a liberal democracy. It has many flaws, a flawed democracy, but it is a democracy because the elections are all in all free and fair and competitive, totally competitive. And that was the case in 2018, because otherwise the opposition would not have been able to win the elections. So the 2018 elections were, before we thought they are not really free and fair, but afterwards we thought, well, they were at least so free and fair that the opposition could win. So I think until now, from 2018 onwards, the political system is in between electoral authoritarianism and electoral democracy. Difficult to say what kind of political system. We have to wait. And since 2018, there are different coalitions. PH is Pakatan Harapan. That's the coalition that won the elections in 2018, the opposition coalition. Now they are again opposition coalition. BN is Barisan Nasional, the National Front. That was the ruling coalition until 2018, and now they have made a comeback a few weeks ago. Yeah, we have since 2018 3 prime ministers. Mahathir at the top until March 2020, then below Muhyiddin. Muhyiddin once UMNO, but now he belongs to a party called Bersatu. Mahathir also belonged to Bersatu, but has established a new party. I will not confuse you with all these names of political parties, but that below Muhyiddin is Ismail Sabri. Ismail Sabri is from UMNO, and he's since I think since August this year, a few weeks ago, he became prime minister. So now you have again a coalition government led by UMNO and some other parties, many other parties. Yeah? And Mahathir at the top is the strange figure who was prime minister of Malaysia from 1981 until 2003. Then he switched to the opposition in 2015 and established a new party. Bersatu became prime minister again in 2018 for the opposition, stepped down in 2020. Now he's again opposition. He's, I think, 95 now, but still active. So with 95, you can still be part of party politics. The new dynamic since a few weeks is that for the first time in Malaysian history, the new government under Ismail Sabri, UMNO, and the opposition were closely together. Why? Because of Corona, because it's very difficult nowadays and they have to find compromises, but also because the majorities in the parliament are very fluid. Sometimes people switch to other parties and then you have new majorities. And in order to avoid this, they have signed a memorandum of understanding. That means they will cooperate, work closely together until the next elections in 2022. And that's quite good, I think. It's very new to Malaysia, because before they would also fight each other, always fight each other. But now they work together to an extent, and we could call this period now a transition period, but a specific form, a pacted transition, because they have established a pact, and that's a specific type of transition, but it's a different subject.
Rumahnya bagus di Afrika.
Sorry, you have to, somebody has to mute his or her microphone. Yeah, thanks. So if we talk about Malaysian politics and Malaysian parties, we have to have in mind the ethnic composition, because in Malaysia, everything is about ethnicity and about the ethnic Indians, ethnic Chinese, and the ethnic Malays, and most parties are based on ethnic identities, in contrast to Indonesia, for example. So you have almost 70% so-called Bumi Putras. Bumi Putras are the Malays. The Malays are around 60%, I would say, of the whole population. And the other Bumi Putras are smaller ethnic groups from East Malaysia, like Dayak, Iban, Kadazan, Dusun, etc. So you have these at least 3 major groups: Bumiputra, Indians, and Chinese. And parties are based, as I said, on ethnic identities. I will give you one example. The component parties of the Barisan Nasional until 2018. Now it's totally different. Until 2018, the BN, the National Front, consisted of UMNO, and then the Chinese party, MCA, Indian party, MIC, and then many smaller parties from East Malaysia. East Malaysia is Sarawak and Sabah, these 2 states. For example, here you have APCO, United, PASOK, Momugun, Kadazan, Dusun, Murut organizations. These are all smaller ethnicities. And many of these Sarawak parties are, well, at least to an extent based on ethnicity. Or here you have on the left side, Gerakan. Gerakan is mostly Chinese, yeah, one would say. And SUPB, I think, Sarawak United People's Party is also mostly Chinese, I think. But Parti Pesaka Bumiputra is, of course, Bumiputra based, and so on. So you've had 13 component parties of the BN and a lot of parties in the opposition. This was the opposition until 2018. Pakatan Harapan, the Alliance of Hope or Hope Alliance, consisting of, for example, the DAP. DAP is mostly Chinese, Democratic Action Party. Here with one of the Timbalan president, Lim Guan Eng. And PKR is the party of Anwar Ibrahim, yeah, Parti Keadilan Rakyat. And then you have Bersatu with Mahathir and Muhyiddin was split from UMNO. And you have Amana, a split from PAS. PAS is the, you would say, Islamist party that now belongs to the coalition of UMNO. And Amana was a split from UMNO, maybe the more moderate wing of PAS. But I know this is very confusing, but just to give you an idea what the opposition was until 2018, and afterwards, after 2018, the government for 2 years. One Aziza, one Ismail is the wife of Anwar Ibrahim, and Muhammad Sabu is from Amana, for example. Yeah, and some other people. So, but as I said, the elections until 2018 were not really free and fair. Yeah, they were to a large extent manipulated. And some of these instruments were, for example, malapportionment and gerrymandering. And this is important to know because this is one of the downsides, one of the disadvantages of first past the post systems within at least authoritarian, electoral authoritarian systems. FPTP is often manipulated by malapportionment and gerrymandering. That means malapportionment, uneven distribution of voters. For example, if you look below, you see that you see the average constituency size, and the average constituency size won by the opposition in 2018 was more than 77,000 voters, and for the BN it was only 46,000 voters. That means constituencies were constructed in a way that it was very difficult for the opposition to win and quite easy for the Barisan Nasional to win a lot of seats. The other thing is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering means also you construct constituencies in a very strange way so that BN always wins. And that was and still is quite important in Malaysia. You have to redraw these constituencies every 8 years. And there's, of course, a lot of infighting when it comes to redraw constituencies. This is not only in FPTP systems, but especially so. And other forms to manipulate was, of course, media control. All the state media, television, radio, and so on were controlled by UMNO and the Barisan Nasional. And then the election commission was totally dependent on the government, also the registrar of societies. And all this, or this mix of manipulations made it easy for the BN to win elections for more than 60 years. Legitimated was the BN by an ideology, you could say, of Ketuhanan Melayu and Islam. That means the Malays are the definitive race. That's what they say. Also Mahathir, the definitive race, and the ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indians are, well, maybe have the same legal rights, but they are not Bumiputras, and Bumiputras in Malaysia have an easier access to university or to get state credits and so on. So there's a kind of ranking between Bumiputras and the others. And the system was, of course, also legitimated by elections and by what they call democracy, well, by some democratic mechanisms at least. And very important was, like in New Order Indonesia, a developmentalist approach. That means economic development was very important for legitimation. There was this Vision 2020, once formulated in the early 90s by Mahathir, that means until 2020, Malaysia will be an industrialized society or industrialized nations like the nations in the West. And well, they, I think, almost achieved it. Yeah? Another very important instrument to stabilize the electoral authoritarianism was co-optation. That means patronage networks of BN and AMNO by our so-called government-linked corporations, GLCs. That means state companies. Yeah? So with a lot of state companies, AMNO and BN would be able to hand out money and to distribute jobs to people who would become part of these patronage networks. Then there was, of course, also vote buying. It's not clear how influential vote buying was. Actually, maybe more in the eastern part of Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak. I think there's a lot of vote buying going on, not so much in peninsular Malaysia. And then there was the typical handout of goodies during elections. A program called BRIM, that's Bantuan Rakyat One Malaysia. So a lot of money. For example, all the taxi drivers got 800 ringgits each within this One Malaysia program. So that was co-optation, and then of course repression played a role. As I said, political rights and civil liberties have been restrained, and they came up with many new acts or laws in the last years before they lost the elections in 2018. For example, a National Security Council Act that was very controversial in 2016, or the anti-fake news law in 2018. Not well defined, as authoritarian systems usually do. They find some vague wordings of these laws in order to employ these laws against all types of opposition. But the BN government was a bit ambivalent. Yeah, they tried to open up the system. That's why they scrapped the Internal Security Act, ISA, in 2012. The ISA was a colonial invention, also still used in Singapore. But then they came up with many new laws because they thought we cannot really open up the political system. Yeah, otherwise we will lose the elections. But I think the anti-fake news law came a bit late, a few weeks before the elections. So maybe they made some mistakes, seen with the eyes of autocrats. So, and against this authoritarian system and the AMNO system or BN system came the opposition with Mahathir and Bersatu and Pakatan Harapan. They wanted to abolish the GST. GST is a value-added tax, very unpopular. They want to increase the minimum wage. Then they wanted royal commissions of inquiry on all kinds of scandals. The biggest scandal was, of course, the 1MDB scandal. 1MDB is one of these government-linked investment companies, totally controlled by Najib. And with 1MDB, he spent and lost billions of dollars. That's why he may well be imprisoned in a few years' time because of that. That was one of the big subjects. And then they wanted a review of all mega projects, especially the projects within the Belt and Road Initiative, the East Coast Railway link, for example, and some others. They want to abolish the repressive laws, Sedition Act, National Security Council Act, and so on. And the reform of parliament and of electoral laws, but I will come to this later, because the opposition always thought that this first past the post system is very unfair and very difficult for the opposition. So, and because of this polarization between BN and Pakatan Harapan, and because of one MDB, Najib Razak, the prime minister at that time, lost in the approval ratings. He was quite popular in 2013, 2014, sometimes more than 60%, but then he lost 20%, 30%, and still in May 2018, most people were very dissatisfied with the prime minister, and that's why he lost. And then came Mahathir in 2018, and he was very popular at the beginning, 83% approval. And the same was true for direction of the country. People thought, of course, the whole country is heading to a wrong direction, more or less the same results. And these surveys are done by the Merdeka Institute, and it is quite trustworthy, I would say. So the causes of the electoral defeat in 2018 were, as I said, the 1MDB scandal, the delegitimation of UMNO and of Najib, a strengthened opposition since the late 1990s. Malaysia also had a Asian financial crisis. Suharto fell because of the Asian financial crisis in 1998, and in Malaysia, an opposition movement started around Anwar Ibrahim. Anwar Ibrahim was the number 2 under Mahathir at that time, and then they fighted each other, and Mahathir, who was at that time really a dictator, provided for Anwar Ibrahim being imprisoned for a few years. And because of that, the Reformasi movement and the role model again was Indonesia started. And well, until the 2010s, this opposition strengthened, party opposition, and that was why they were able to win. And another reason is that some parties split. As I said, UMNO split, and Bersatu was established by Mahathir. And without Mahathir, the opposition would not have been able to win. And this was very strange because Mahathir was the enemy of the opposition. But then Mahathir switched to his own enemies. That was quite sensational in 2015. And there was the split of the Islamist party PAS. The moderate wing Amanah switched to the opposition, and the rest switched to Najib Razak, although there was the 1MDB scandal. That was a bit strange. So, and then there were these elections in 2018. Pakatan Harapan won with PKR, the Anwar Ibrahim party, DAP, the Chinese party, Bersatu, Mahathir party, and so on. And although Bersatu is rather small, Mahathir became the new prime minister because he was somehow in the middle of all these parties. He was maybe not a compromise candidate, but because of his age and because he knew so much about ruling the country, he was picked as prime minister. And UMNO was quite weak, only 54 seats, and all the other parties are very small. Most of the other BN parties are from East Malaysia, and not really influential. It's all about UMNO within BN. And then there was PAS, the Islamist party. It was a third coalition led by PAS, but later PAS and UMNO worked closely together until now. So PH had a small majority with 113 seats. There are 222. That means you need 112 seats to have a majority. PH had 113 plus Warisan. Warisan more or less worked together with PH, but that's another subject. Here you can see the states, yeah, and the constituencies in the states of Malaysia. So on the right side, you have Sabah. In Sarawak, there were no elections at the state level. And on the left side, you have the West Coast. The West Coast is red. It means the opposition won most of the red of the West Coast because it's more urban. And in urban areas, there are more ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indians. And I think more than 80% of ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indians voted for the opposition. And then you have this green part at the top. Green is PAS, the Islamist party, because in Kelantan and Terengganu, it's more rural, many peasants. And in this area, PAS was always very strong and for most of the time dominant. Even in 1959, when the first elections were in Malaysia, PAS won at least in Kelantan, yeah, at the top, maybe also in Terengganu, I don't know. And the blue one is mostly UMNO. Well, UMNO is maybe dominant also more in rural constituencies or semi-urban constituencies. And in Malaysia, they distinguish urban, semi-urban, rural. And this is most important to understand who wins elections. So I have to think whether something is missing. But maybe you have some questions later on. I think you will have some questions, yeah, because there are still some gaps in the narrative I have constructed. So I was looking at one of the websites I recommended, the website by the ACE project, and they have some nice comments on advantages and disadvantages of all these electoral systems. And the advantages of first past the post systems in general, I'm not talking now about Malaysia, but in general, are that these systems are very simple. Yeah, everybody immediately understands who wins. Yeah, you select one or elect one candidate and he or she wins or wins not. It's about a simple plurality, and that's it. Very easy to understand. And usually you have in these constituencies in Malaysia only two candidates, one from BN, one from Pakatan Harapan. In 2018, you often had three candidates, the third one from PAS, yeah? PAS, UMNO, and then Pakatan Harapan. That was the usual three-cornered fight, they would say. And the opposition also won because PAS and UMNO often had more or less the same voters, at least in many constituencies. And that was very good for the Pakatan Harapan candidates in many cases. Yeah. So advantage, it's simple. It produces winners who are representatives beholden to defined geographic areas. So you have one member of parliament in your constituencies, and there's a very close connection to this person. And especially in Malaysia. In Malaysia, if you have a problem, you go to your member of parliament and he or she will hopefully help you. And these members of parliament, they get specific allowances, I think a few 100,000 ringgit, and they can spend these allowances for different purposes. The strange thing that was that until 2018, only the government MPs would get these allowances. Yeah, these allowances, not the opposition members. That was, of course, again, very, very unfair. Now, these days, they start to give the same amount to government members and opposition members. Another advantage, it gives rise to single party governments. In general, maybe. In the UK, yes, very often. In the US is maybe the role model of an FPTP system. Yeah, you have only the Republicans or only the Democrats, but in general, you could say, no, it does not really always give rise to single party governments. In Indonesia, in Malaysia, you have governments consisting of 10, 15 parties, maybe. Yeah? But yeah, I have to add this. The Barisan Nasional is also registered as a political party. So you could say, in a way, you have a two-party system in Malaysia. Pakatan Harapan, I think it is registered as a party, I'm not quite sure, and BN as a party. But these parties are consisting of many other parties, so it's very unclear, for example, to say how many parties there are in Malaysia. Yeah? Some people would even say it's now a two-party system in Malaysia, but I would say no, it's nonsense, because actually it's a multi-party system, and these coalitions are not real parties. Yeah? Advantage, it gives rise to a coherent opposition, maybe in other FPTP systems, but not in Malaysia. The advantage is you have broadly based political parties. This is right when you say that PH and BN are parties, then they are broadly based, all ethnic groups, and many different political streams. But if you look at the component parties, no, it's not really broad based. On the opposite, I mean, PAS as an Islamist party is much more Islamist than PPP or PAN or PKB in Indonesia, because PAS really wants an Islamic state and Sharia law, penal code according to the Sharia. That's not the case as far as I know in Indonesia, maybe PKS, but not really. No? So not really broad-based. And then another advantage, according to the ACE project, in severely ethnically or regionally divided societies, it encourages political parties to be broad churches. Yeah, that's more or less the same point. No, it's not really the case in Malaysia. It excludes extremist parties. You could say that if we look at the US, yes, you don't have right-wing or radical leftist parties in the US. You only have the Republicans and Democrats. But even there was this polarization because of Donald Trump, and now the Republican Party is, to an extent, extremist, I would say. So even that does not really work in FPTPs. It promotes a link between constituencies and their representatives. Yes, that's right, I think. It gives a chance for popular independent candidates. Yes, sometimes, I would say, but not in the US. Are there independent candidates in Congress? I don't think so. And in Malaysia, there are also independent candidates, but they never win. You have to be part of BN or Pakatan Harapan. So all these advantages do not really work. So then the ACE project comes up with disadvantages. And I think many of these disadvantages are true, also with reference to Malaysia, because FPTP excludes usually smaller parties. Yeah, I think politics in the US would be much easier if they would have 5, 6, 7 different parties. Then the Trumpists could have their own party and could be a member of a coalition government, but they would be moderated, within a coalition. FPTPs exclude minorities from fair representation. yes, I think usually that's true. If you are belonging to ethnic minority with, let's say, 6-7%, you are not able to win a constituency usually. But again, in Malaysia, it's a bit different. There are the ethnic Indians, 6-7% of the population, but they have their own party, MIC. MIC is part of BN, and that means in some constituencies, MIC candidates run on the ticket of the BN and can become members of parliaments. So if you have this arrangement, this kind of inter-ethnic pact within a coalition, then minorities can get a fair representation. It excludes women from the legislature because of the most broadly acceptable candidate syndrome. Yeah, usually they want one candidate who is able to assemble a majority or plurality. I'm not sure whether this is right. I think the number of women in Malaysian parliament is more or less like in Indonesia. I'm not very convinced. Another disadvantage, it encourages developments of political parties based on clan, ethnicity, or region. Yeah, I think so, especially ethnicity or region, but the whole mechanism is much more complex than here suggested by the ACE project. I think they were thinking all the time about the US and maybe the United Kingdom, But if you look at Malaysia and I think some other countries in Africa, for example, it is not like this. It exaggerates the phenomenon of regional fiefdoms. That means there are some parties who are very strong in some regions, but not nationally. Yeah, I think it's true also in the United Kingdom. You have, for example, the Scottish Nationalist Party only in Scotland and nowhere else. And in Malaysia, you have all these East Malaysian parties, only in Sarawak and Sabah, nowhere else. And you have PAS very strong in Kelantan, Terengganu, but not really in Selangor or Penang, these West Coast states. So there are regional fiefdoms, but on the other hand, maybe it's not really a problem to have some parties who are very strong in some regions. But I think one of the main disadvantages is the large number of wasted votes. As I said, sometimes a candidate gets only 25 or 30% of the votes and is elected, and the other 70 or 75% of the votes are wasted. So your vote often does not translate into seats. And there's the huge risk of gerrymandering and or malapportionment. That's typical for first past the post systems. I think in proportional systems, there's of course also the regular delimitation of constituencies, the reconstruction of these constituencies, but you cannot gerrymander like in FPTP systems. It's almost impossible. For example, in Germany, of course, we have 299 constituencies and they have to be redrawn because people migrate because of urbanization and so on. But it is never an issue because it's not really important. I've never heard a public debate on redelineation issues in Germany, never. And most people do not even know that something like that exists. But in Malaysia, it's always a major subject, even now. So conclusions. What about the FPTP in Malaysia? Is it a simple system? Yes, that's maybe an advantage. What about representation? I think one of the main functions of electoral systems is that the electoral system should help to represent the whole society, all groups, in a more or less proportional way. But this systems in FPTP systems, parties that get maybe only around 50% of the votes often
Hello, S.
UMNO one,
Okay,
it's not stable.
because your voice suddenly missing, but it's okay, no problem.
It's
Maybe
okay.
you
Okay.
can from FPTP and polarization maybe there.
Yeah, I'm still at representation.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
because
okay.
UMNO in 2013, I think, UMNO won less than 50% of the popular votes, but they still had a two-thirds majority in the national parliament. And some people would say that's good because then they can govern, not these brittle or fragile majorities, but I would say it's very bad because it would be better if the opposition is better represented and if there's more kind of proportional system. Then about polarization and cleavages, first past the post systems tend to polarize. You have usually two different parties or coalitions, and they fight each other. So the whole society is polarized. I think that's problematic. In proportional systems, it's rather the case that you have multi-party systems. They have to coalesce, they have to build coalitions. And if you build coalitions, it results in depolarization. Like in Germany now, we will probably have, as I said last week, we will probably have a new government built by the Social Democratic Party, the Liberal Party, and the Green Party. And usually the Greens and the Liberals are not really friends, but now you see they come together, they talk each day for 10 hours, and now they are on friendly terms. So, and also the supporters of these parties are now realizing, well, these liberals are not so bad, and the Greens are not all pumpkins. So it depolarizes, I would say. And in Malaysia, it's sometimes almost sick the way these people fight each other. But this also had, of course, to do with the electoral authoritarianism. And it was about democratization. Yeah, it was a polarization between those defending authoritarianism and those from Pakatan Harapan who want a real democratization. Yeah. But in Malaysia, you also have these ethnic and religious cleavages, very important. So the Malays are always Muslims, according to the constitution. It's not possible that a Malay is not a Muslim. This is stated in the constitution. Very strange. I don't know how this works. And the ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indians are usually not Muslims, not always, of course, but you have these overlapping cleavages, Muslim Malay versus non-Muslim non-Malay. And well, this is not very healthy, I would say. It's better to bridge these cleavages. And is this possible in FPTPs? Difficult to say, because in Malaysia you have this translation of cleavages into the party system via parties and coalitions. You have these two steps, and at least the second step, these multi-ethnic, multi-religious coalitions also depolarize. I mean, if UMNO is campaigning, they are campaigning as a Malay Muslim Bumiputra party and about Ketuhanan Melayu and so on. But at the same time, they are working together with the Chinese party MCA and MIC and stress multi-ethnicity and harmony, racial harmony. So it's always about two different strategies at the same time, according to which audience they are talking to. It's a bit schizophrenic, you could say. But this is true for all parties. Even the smaller Chinese parties are sometimes a bit racist, very much anti-Malay. So this is always part of the political discourse of Malaysia. And then, as I said, FPTP in authoritarian system often leads to manipulation via gerrymandering and malapportionment. And then I'm very much working on political parties, and I'm interested in the linkage between the electoral system and the party system, the electoral system and the number of parties, and the type of parties, the type of coalitions. And there was one French political scientist, Maurice Duverger, very popular, very important, at least in the 1950s and 60s. And he thought that there's a kind of political law, he called it a law, that in simple majority, single ballot systems, usually two-party systems arise. And he was, of course, looking at the United Kingdom at that time and at the US. And at that time, most people thought, yeah, he's right. If you have the first past the post system, you always have two candidates in all constituencies. And at the end, you have two different parties. But now, a few decades later, most political scientists would say that Duverger is wrong, because in many first past the post systems, you have a huge number of parties. And it's, of course, not a law. It's maybe sometimes a tendency that you that it favors a two-party system, but not more. And if you look at Malaysia, as I said, it's maybe a two-coalition system now, but it's definitely not a two-party system. And so I think nowadays read Duverger, but be aware of the faults of Duverger's thinking. And he had not only this law, he also had the hypothesis. He didn't call it a law that proportional systems lead to multi-party systems. Yeah, that's, well, in contrast to the FPTP. And this is maybe a hypothesis that is true. But if you look at electoral systems, you always have to look at the niceties of these systems. It's not only about first past the post versus proportional, but some other regulations have a major impact. For example, if in Indonesia it is stated that a political party has to be organized nationally in almost all districts or provinces. This is not the case in Malaysia. But if they would introduce this regulation in Malaysia, the whole party system would be a totally different one, because all these Sarawak and Sabah parties would vanish, yeah? And the number of parties would decrease, yeah? And the whole coalitions would be different ones. Yeah, so some minor regulations can have a very, very strong impact, and you have to have this in mind. So I think that's it. And I would be happy if you have a few questions. Did I talk too much, I think?
Okay, thank you, Andreas. That's really interesting, yeah, about the FPTP, mainly what's going on in Malaysia. Okay, before I have questions, maybe it's better if I let students first. If you have any specific question, just let Andreas Ufen know, and he will help you to explain. Okay. Any one of you want to ask?
You can use the chat function.
Yeah, or you can use the chat box. Any one of you? Usually salsa, maybe last week salsa. Okay, I have one question before maybe others still thinks about which one First question. One of the characteristic FPTP usually used by UK and other countries which already colonialized by UK, yeah. But because a lot of countries around the world which applied FPTP, yeah, according to the idea data. So, what do you mean? I mean, the future of FPTP is other countries which use the FPTP will change to proportional PR system. I mean, because when I read some reference, some countries move to the other countries like like New Zealand. It changed from FPTP to MMP. Yeah. What does it mean? Do you mean is that because one of the advantage is small parties have no chance to be part of the democratic competition under FPTP. Yeah. So what do you mean if you look at the other countries which apply FPTP? They, small parties or others, other forces want to establish FPTP, or they have other opinion to change to list PR system because it is more proportional, yeah, and friendly to small parties, even to middle parties, because FPTP tends to be the winner takes all, have no chance for middle and small parties to take a democratic competitions, yeah, and engage in the electoral and engage in the parliamentary seats. Yeah, that's what what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I will touch upon that next week. There's an article or a few articles by Australian political scientist Ben Riley, R-E-I-L-L-Y, Ben Riley, and he at least says, and he at least says that in Asia there's a tendency from FPTP systems to at least mixed systems. Yeah, I think there are mixed systems in Taiwan, Korea, Philippines, Thailand. In Thailand, they have also, that's what I learned this week, since 2019, MMP actually. Before they had a parallel system, and now they switched in 2019 to MMP, like in Germany. And as you said, in New Zealand. And many years ago, I think in Thailand, they had something like first past the post. I'm not quite sure. And Riley says that was or is still a tendency all over Asia that they use to switch to proportional representation, or at least to mixed systems. And I think that's true. But I think Riley wrote in one of his articles that this is a specific Asian phenomenon. That this has not been the case in Latin America or Africa or East Europe. Yeah, in East Europe they have, I think, mostly presidential systems. I'm not quite no. They have some parliamentary systems, but then they have some presidential systems with FPTP in Russia, I think. But this is, I think, an Asian phenomenon. But on the other hand,
this is Asian phenomenon, yeah.
Yeah, that's what Ben Riley says. I think.
Okay, Ben Riley said,
maybe true. And I think that was also the discussion in Indonesia. In Indonesia, some people at the beginning wanted FPTP, especially from Golkar, I think. Yeah.
I'm not sure that's something changed.
Yeah. I have to look at it. Yeah, but there was a major debate, which which team was it? Team of 11, or I forgot everything. But there was a debate on whether first past the post or proportional representation, and then they came up with studies. What would FPTP mean in Indonesia? Yeah, what about representation and so on? And then they came up maybe with a compromise, because now you have 80 constituencies. That's a lot. Yeah, in Germany we have 16 constituencies at the state level, and sometimes you can also have a proportional representation system with only one constituency, the whole country. Yeah? But in Indonesia, I think they had 77, and now they have 80. That means it's also in a way in the middle between proportional representation and a plurality system, more towards the PR side, yeah, of this. But if you have many constituencies, it's getting close to some kind of not FPTP, but to a plurality or majority system. What would happen if Indonesia would not have 80 constituencies, but let's say 150? Then you would have less parties, less and less parties, and maybe you would not have single member districts, but 2 member districts only. If you only would have 2 member districts, that would mean only 2 parties or party members would be elected in all these constituencies, and that would mean at the end you would only have maybe 3 parties in parliament or 4, and 2 dominant parties. So you can, with the number of constituencies, you can switch from one pole to the other. No? And this is, I mean, this fine-tuning of the electoral system, this is maybe a tendency, because people have time and they think, there's a lot of political science, and especially in Indonesia, where you change the electoral system every few years or months, and also in Thailand, because of all the coups and of the new constitutions, every time they come up with a new electoral system. But I think the tendency is to see that a mix of different systems may be more representative and fairer. Yeah, but in the Philippines, the parallel system is very incomplete, because 80% are voted via a plurality system, first past the post, and only 20% via the party list, via, yeah, more or less incomplete proportional representation system. So it's only a little bit proportional representation, not really a mixed system. And I think also in Thailand, the proportional part is the smaller one. No? That's what I still think. And in the Philippines, via proportional representation, it's not about the political parties, but about party-like organizations, often built by political parties as proxies. So very strange system, and a very bad compromise, I would think. Yeah, maybe this mix of electoral system is a result of compromises between different groups, but the old elites are still too powerful in order to allow a real reform. So they reform it only a little bit. A bit like in Indonesia, the reforms were incomplete with reference to the DPD. The DPD is almost powerless. That was not a real reform, I think.
Yeah, because of the constitution, yeah. Because of the constitution, the constitution let DPD the big power, yeah. That's the problem, yeah, because of the constitution.
Yeah, but behind the constitutions are interests of certain groups, yeah. They wanted to centralize political power in Jakarta, and of course, also the fear that Indonesia could break apart if the provinces or districts are too powerful, then maybe these centripetal forces would be too strong. That's understandable, yes. Yeah, but I think it's an Asian phenomenon, but I'm not really sure. I mean, yeah, I think you have FPTP systems in Malaysia and Singapore. I don't know about Cambodia. But in these electoral authoritarian systems, you have FPTP systems, I think, because manipulation is very easy. In Singapore, you also have gerrymandering, malapportionment, and all these things. It's very good in electoral authoritarian system to stabilize the power of the dominant party, because you have a lot of competition, but at the end, you have small majorities also for the People's Action Party in Singapore, but 2/3 majority in parliament. It's the best system for them. But if Malaysia now democratizes, they will change the electoral system. I'm quite sure. There's a commission working on that. There's this NGO or civil society organization, Bersih, clean, yeah? In Malaysia, they say Bersih. They usually anglicize these words. And Bersih wants, some of them also want MMP. Yeah, that's what I have heard. So they're very much interested in the German system. But of course, you have to look at the specific conditions in Malaysia. Would MMP really be the best system? And what would happen with all these very small parties? And it's very difficult to introduce a new electoral system because all these parties who have to reform the electoral system do not really know what will happen, and they think that they might lose, and because of that, reforming this is very, very difficult. And I don't see that in Malaysia in the next few years, especially not before the next elections in 2022. So reforming electoral laws is almost impossible. But even in Germany in the 1970s, we had a social democratic chancellor, Helmut Schmidt. And Helmut Schmidt was very much fond of British culture, and he liked Great Britain very much, and he always thought we need this first past the post system. This proportional representation does not work. We always need coalitions and then compromise. And as a chancellor, you cannot really rule or govern because you always have to ask the other parties, what do you think? It's much better in Great Britain. And he wanted to introduce FPTP, but of course, this was not possible, and I think it was good that we didn't introduce FPTP.
What do you mean? It is not possible in Germany, yeah?
Because, of course, the smaller parties are definitely against it.
Yeah, that's right.
And also the Social Democrats. Okay, at that time when Helmut Schmidt said it, maybe the Social Democrat had a majority of votes. That's possible, but usually they didn't have. So the Social Democrats were also very skeptical of that. And you don't know what happened. Maybe you have a political crisis for a decade because of that. I once read that, but that's maybe another subject. In Israel, in 1990, I think, they introduced the direct election of the prime minister. Very strange. This has never been done anywhere, direct election of the prime minister, because that would mean a presidentialization, and the reform totally failed. And after 10 years, they went back to not, of course, directly electing the prime minister, because the party system imploded more or less afterwards. And this can, of course, happen if you introduce a new electoral system, especially FPTP. Yeah, maybe that's the case. If you introduce FPTP, many parties will die and the whole party system will implode or explode. But if you introduce a mixed system, then the results are moderate, yeah, and especially like in the Philippines and Thailand, we have a smaller part of a party list. That does not revolutionize the whole system. That's still manageable. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
long answer.
Yeah, no problem. That's good, I think. Okay, I have one other question, but I will let other, yeah, if you have any questions, maybe students.
Students ask.
Yeah. Any one of you, or maybe text in the chat box.
My impression is that Indonesians are not really interested in Malaysia. Is that right? It's strange because it's the neighboring country, and there are many similarities between Indonesia and Malaysia.
Yeah. Because maybe different culture, yeah, because Malaysia only consists of one, one land, yeah, just small of differences among of them, while Indonesia has a lot of different islands, different culture, different so on and so forth. So it is really difficult, maybe, yeah, if we apply FPTP, yeah, because maybe like middle and small parties, I think, will reject this option, I think, because because it is not friendly for them, yeah, like PAN and maybe a Democrat, yeah, they are worried, yeah, they are worried.
Yeah, I think that was the debate in 1998, 99. PAN, PKB, maybe PDIP and Golkar were quite fond of FPTP. Because
I think they will agree about these options, because in Indonesia there is unfinished debate on the simplification of political parties. Yeah, I think PDIP, Golkar, and maybe Gerindra, yeah, will agree with this system, because it will make the simplification of moderate party. The simplification of the number of the parties, but yeah, so middle parties like PAN, PKS, and others will fight against this view, I think. Okay, any one of you? If not, I think one last question from me. In Malaysia, because I don't know, yeah. In Malaysia, if you interact with Malaysian politician, maybe any other option, any other ideas, from politician about the possibility to change from FPTP, or most of them still agree to establish this system for Malaysian electoral system?
No, I think there is this commission, and there are many people who are willing to change, but I do not know the whole debate in details. I think at the moment it's more about the constituencies, how to construct the different constituencies. For example, in the capital Kuala Lumpur, you need more than 100,000 votes, or you have more than 100,000 votes per constituency, and in some rural areas it's only about 30, 40, 50,000 votes. So this imbalance has to be reformed. But I cannot really imagine that they switch immediately to a proportional representation system. That would be a bit strange, I think, especially with respect to East Malaysia. I think they maybe could find a compromise, maybe a parallel system, a parallel system. Maybe MMP would be manageable, but whether there is a majority, I think nobody knows. It depends on the 22 elections. If UMNO wins in 22, then there will not be a reform. But if you again have a very small majority and shifting coalitions and so on, then maybe it's very, very difficult to say. At the moment, they are also talking about an anti-hopping law, because members of parliament often hop from one party to the other. And for example, Muhyiddin was prime minister, but then a few members of parliament hopped or switched to other parties, and then Muhyiddin lost his majority, and now there's a new prime minister, Ismail Sabri. And Ismail Sabri thought maybe a few others will hop again, and then there will again be another prime minister. In order to avoid this, they will come up with an anti-hopping law, I think. So this happens very often in Malaysia. Just a week ago in Malacca, the state of Malacca, a few people hopped to the other side, and now they will have elections in a few weeks' time, I guess. Very unstable nowadays in Malaysia. You don't know what will happen. Because of that, they have the memorandum of understanding now. That means a ceasefire, you could say. Nobody hops to the other side. Ismail Sabri will be prime minister until the middle of next year. It's until the end of July, this memorandum of understanding. And then it starts again. Then the ceasefire is over, and then there will be elections, I think.
Okay. I think maybe you can give just a simple, the last conclusions. The future of FPTP. Maybe what about other countries? Most of them will change to the more proportional or mixed systems. What about that if you interact with other countries around the world, other politicians around the world?
I do not really know what's going on in Africa or Latin America, but I guess there's maybe a slight tendency towards more proportional system and mixed systems. That's my feeling, at least. And if new countries are established, like East Timor, they usually don't use FPTP. I mean, East Timor also has proportional representation. I think it's more popular, I would say. Proportional representation.
Okay, I think that's enough for today. A lot of information and critics and the fate of the FPTP. I don't know what the meaning of first past the post. What does it mean? I sometimes ask about this. Do you know?
I think the first one who maybe like in a race, 100-meter race, the first one who passed the post that is maybe standing there, something like that.
First past the post, and what the post who? Okay,
I don't know. I will try to find out. The post.
I'm still also find the meaning of first past the post. First past the post. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Ufen, for your times and sharing with us, with the students, about the implementation of FPTP mainly in Malaysia. And next week, we will move to the other topics about the direct presidential election, mainly in Philippines.
No,
yeah?
I think next week about electoral systems in general.
Oh, okay.
maybe-
Electoral in general, yeah.
I think so. I think that's better. Yeah, about these three
Okay.
families and
Yeah,
subfamilies,
yeah.
and
Yeah, because sometimes when I discuss with students, they are still confused to differentiate because almost similar between alternative food with Bordacon and SNDP and so on and so forth. Yeah, even between MMP and parallel. Yeah, yeah.
I'm also often confused, I have to say. Yeah, really.
Yeah, same with me. So sometimes when I teach students, I have a small notice, yeah, how to differentiate among of them. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
okay.
it's okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you very much, Andreas, for your times, and I wish you are still good health, yeah, and we can meet again virtually next week on Zoom platform. Thank you very much for your time, Andreas,
Thank you.
and take care of
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
And schönen Tag noch. Okay.